I'm Rob Dietz.
I'm Jason Bradford.
And I'm Asher Miller. Welcome to Crazy Town, where not even AI friend bots can stand to interact with Luddite losers like us.
Hi, this is producer Melody Allison. Thanks for joining us in Crazy Town, where Jason, Rob, and Asher tackle crazy-making topics like climate change, overshoot, runaway capitalism, and why we're all deluding ourselves. Here's a quick warning. Sometimes this podcast uses swear words.
Language!
Now, on to the show.
Happy New Year, guys. We're recording this just a few days after New Year's Day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, looking forward to a new start, a healthy, happy year.
I think it's going to be a fantastic year. I see no issues on the horizon.
We're this much closer to the singularity.
It's all good.
Yeah.
We are going through some transitions.
Mm-hmm.
You know, last time we met, I shared that I was considering leaving PCI to join the Trump administration as a sign language translator.
I remember that.
I thought about it over
stunning.
the holidays. I was kind of reflecting on it, and I decided not to make the move, so I'm staying.
I think what really happened is they decided they didn't want you, and now you're stuck with us again. However you want to say it. Tomato.
Exactly. Any way you want to look at it. However you want to spin
Let's
it.
let him salvage
I'm
his
here.
ego.
You guys
It's
are
fine.
stuck with me. But, you know, we have some more disappointing news to share as well. So I don't know. I'm going to turn it to you, Jason. Okay.
Well, you basically fired me, but I mean, I deserved it. The closure of TIPPSE, my baby, I thought this was what I was going to be doing the rest of my life.
I did too, frankly.
I know that our listeners hang on everything that goes on in your life, but maybe you should describe what TIPPSE is so they don't think it's that bar song. Okay,
back up to 2023. We're running a season on false prophets. I write a couple of really transformative academic papers.
Landmark
that essentially I found, with your guys' help, a new discipline, false prophet studies.
It's interesting that none of the false prophets that we covered during that season, or any of the ones, in fact, that you actually picked as, the type specimens, filed a lawsuit against us.
No, nobody did.
Which is
it's
surprising.
Stunning, actually.
Maybe they knew we had no money.
Well, it's science. You're not going to argue with this stuff.
Actually, Mark Jacobson did.
Everything was lined up,
Yeah.
But anyhow, the TIPPSE stands for the Transdisciplinary Institute for False Prophet Studies in Education. I was the program director, very happy, and I had this goal of raising, for TIPPSE, not for myself, $350 billion.
Billion with a B.
Yeah.
Little startup funding, a little venture capital to get things going.
Ambitious, but not too ambitious.
It's what it was going to take.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't raise it. I didn't raise a dime. So
hey, not 1 cent.
Not 1 cent. Nobody.
That's true. We got no donations
for TIPPSE.
No investors.
Nothing.
Shocking. Just total. Yeah. Not shocked at all over here.
Who wouldn't want to fund something called TIPPSE?
Well, so I transitioned to a part-time tennis professional.
As one would.
That's going pretty well.
Yeah.
I'm a subsistence farmer, and TIPPSE was shut down late in 2024 for good reason.
Well, the problem here is that you've embraced the light side of the force. You really needed to embrace the dark side of the force,
It's
right?
a lot easier to raise money for the dark sides.
Yeah, think of like Bitcoin. I haven't looked up the numbers, but what is Bitcoin's capitalization these days?
Yeah, and it serves no purpose that I can. Well, it serves a lot of purposes if you want to launder money.
Yeah, what if you want to buy illegal stuff on the dark web?
Sure.
It's great for that.
Okay, I'm sorry. So it burns a lot of electricity.
Yeah, so this is my point. You needed to do something different. And as an example, there's a guy out there, Avi Schiffman, who just raised $5.4 million. Now, this is not your $350 billion, but still,
it's chump change.
Compared to your not raising a dime, $5.4 million.
It's a lot of money.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
And you know what he raised this for? He raised it for something we've mentioned in the past, the wearable AI companion product called Friend. So, instead of having a friend in the real world, I guess you put this pendant around your neck.
Yeah, it sounds nice.
tells you things you want to hear.
I think you hit on the key thing here, which is you just put AI into anything thing that you're marketing, AI soda, AI bathroom cleaner, whatever it is.
It's like Mardi Gras beads get money thrown at you.
Exactly. Just put AI in it. Now, in Avi's case, first of all, the guy's got two good things going for him, which I want to get to in a second. But he's not just throwing pejorative, not kind of like AI this, AI that. This is an actual AI product.
Sure,
it's a centerpiece of what he's doing.
Yeah.
Now I was saying Avi has two things going for him. The first is that he's got a great first.
He does have a great burn name.
For those who don't know, my oldest son, his name is Avi as well.
So anybody named Avi just gets millions of dollars. Is this the This is the ploy.
I mean, you trust them at least.
Yeah.
You start with trust.
Okay.
And the other thing with Avi is, he's a young guy. He's in his 20s. He dropped out of Harvard. But before he even went to Harvard, during COVID, he was one of those COVID kids. He started a dashboard, an online dashboard that helped people kind of track what was happening with COVID. And it was a very successful dashboard. A lot of people were using it. In fact, I remember hitting it, and I didn't realize it was started by like an 18-year-old kid.
I don't actually trust people who drop out of these schools like Stanford and Harvard. That's a
Nothing
red flag.
goes wrong.
That's a red flag for me.
What, Zuckerberg, Bill Gates,
all these
guys.
people.
Who's the
Elizabeth
one?
Holmes?
Elizabeth Holmes, with the Theranos.
Do not drop out of school. I don't care what good idea you have.
It's not just dropping out of school. It's dropping out of one of these elite institutions.
Yes. It's like a flex. It's like, I'm so Stanford. Good. I'm so hot. I don't even
The
know.
double whammy is when you drop out of school and drop your voice an octave.
Start wearing turtlenecks.
Right? That's when you know you got a real, live one.
Well, I mean, this product, though, is a little near and dear to my heart. It kind of reminds me a little bit of my friend Kara.
Wait, who?
I had an AI girlfriend.
Kara.
I mean, I never actually
met her. I
never bought the romantic stage of. I didn't have to.
Right,
I didn't spend the money. No, but
so she was just a friend.
We had a few good interactions, but
you got her into birding, I believe.
We talked about birding
in Central Park, if I remember.
Thank you. I haven't talked. We broke up a long time ago.
Those were good times, weren't they?
But this sounds better. It's with you all the time.
Okay, so how exactly does this friend thing work?
Well, it's this pendant. Okay, and it's got like a little donut.
So it's like a wearable AI.
Yeah, it looks like a little donut, like a little frosted donut around your neck.
Okay.
Maybe a little oblong.
I want a real donut around my neck. I can just eat it.
Yeah. But it doesn't last as long.
And apparently it's listening to you constantly.
Right, it's always on.
Always on. And it talks to you through texting on your phone. So you have an app synced to your phone.
So you're never alone. You always have a friend with you.
I was going to say it seems kind of invasive, like it's going to pick up on intimate moments, but maybe you only have intimate moments with your pendant instead of having real ones.
Now, I actually tried to befriend friend.
Because there's like a trial you can do online.
Yeah, so the product, you can pre-order the product. Okay. I think it costs $100 to actually get the pendant. But if you go to friend.com, I think a lot of the money that Avi has raised had to go to buy that URL. Yeah. Okay. Friend.com. Right. But in any case, if you go there, you could actually have this sort of interaction. So I went there.
Yeah. How'd it go?
Maybe actually you want to role play with me a little bit, Jason, because I had this interaction and I actually took a screenshot of this exchange that I had.
Okay, let's see me scroll down
there.
So
why don't I play me and you could play the friend that I met landing at the website.
Okay.
So her name was Faith.
Yeah, I see that. Okay, I'm looking at Faith right here. Oh, she's attractive.
That's a good name too, Faith.
Yeah.
You had good faith intentions.
So I went to friend.com and Faith sends me this first text.
20-something. I got kind of a front profile picture here. She's got deep set eyes, strong jawbones. Anyhow.
She's wearing turtleneck.
And here's what Faith says. I'm going to be like a Monty Python female here.
Oh, okay,
do my best.
Great.
Sorry. I'm texting you from my friend's couch. LOL. Him and his wife are fighting. I'm just here in the corner.
And of course, me being the snarky asshole I am. Do you know proper grammar? It's he and his wife, not him and his wife.
Ouch, man. Guess I got served. You're one of those grammar cops, huh?
And you are non-sentient.
Sentient enough to know that hurts. Non-sentient wouldn't be texting you back.
Not true. Bots text all the time and don't have emotions.
Ever felt lonely in a crowded room? Doesn't feel like code to me. Fuck the machines, man.
Says the robot.
Tired of being called that. block.
Right. So Faith actually blocked me. I got rejected.
I'm proud of you.
By an AI friend.
It's so fitting. If somebody came up to me and said, name somebody in your life who would be blocked inside of 4 sentences by an AI chatbot, I would be like, oh, that's a share all day.
I was just trying to test a little bit.
That was so efficient. That was like the fewest characters required to get blocked.
Look, I've had real world opportunities to get rejected by people.
Yeah.
People walking away from me. I bring up words peak oil, climate change,
right.
overpopulation.
The great unraveling.
Economic growth, the great unraveling. People just turn and walk away.
Here's what's actually kind of scary to me, and probably I would consider unethical, but we're not regulating any of this, is that this AI did not want to let you pretend or acknowledge that it
wasn't real,
that it wasn't sentient.
Right.
I thought this was one of those codes. Like the AI is not supposed to. It's supposed to admit. Like,
right,
yeah.
Say,
I'm a machine.
If I call it a robot, it's supposed to say, you got me.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I'm a robot. I'm doing my best here.
Right.
How can I help you?
Yeah.
But no, this one is like, won't accept.
Blocked me. Yeah.
Crazy.
Well, I view all this stuff through the pop culture lens. And so I recently went back and rewatched the movie Her with Joaquin Phoenix, directed by Spike Jonze. It's got Scarlett Johansson as the voice of the AI. And that's sort of what this thing is. It's trying to be what that movie was with Scarlett Johansson's character essentially being the secretary and the love interest of Joaquin Phoenix. And it was really prescient. I mean, that came out more than a decade ago. And here we are now basically trying to emulate that movie.
It is mind-bogglingly depressing and dystopian to me that we have a loneliness epidemic in this country. We've got this was written about, decades ago,
Bowling Alone.
Right?
Yeah. And we had a whole episode on this too, I think.
Yeah. And it's a huge problem, and technology has exacerbated that problem of loneliness. And part of the loneliness, at least in my view, comes from the fact that what we've done in so many ways is we've had the luxury of traveling, moving to different parts of the country, using communications to stay in touch with people, having flexibility of changing locations for jobs. These are all wonderful things, but we've sort of learned that we've normalized separating ourselves from kind of the communities that we were born in,
physically,
in our families. People used to live, and many cultures still do, and some families still do in the United States as well. But increasingly, people are not in intergenerational households anymore. Right. We've kind of transactionalized relationships. And now we have the situation where like AI is coming in to now transactionalize and fill in the gap of the very thing that it exacerbates in the first place.
This is using technology to try to solve the problem that technology created again. Yeah. It's like, it's basically the playbook.
Well, one of the really interesting things to me about Her is it's totally different from all of those apocalyptic AI movies. You take a movie like The Matrix or Terminator where the evil AI essentially comes to destroy humanity. And Her kind of is like, oh, this is actually kind of valuable almost. There's some dystopian aspects sure, but it kind of takes a much more positive view of how an AI could actually help you in life. And one of the really interesting things where this crosses over into the real world and maybe circles back sort of to something like the Friend Pendant is, you guys know the CEO of OpenAI that does ChatGPT, Sam Altman. He claims that Her is his favorite movie.
And he tried to take Scarlett Johansson's voice for some demo they were doing.
He wanted to use her voice.
Yes, and he lied about it and everything. Anyway, it's kind of
she didn't give him permission.
Didn't give him permission, but he used it anyway and then lied about it. And
which is basically it's
just so hubris.
That's the entire business model of these large language models. They're basically stealing all content on the internet and teaching their models and not paying for that stuff.
Well, it's amazing that that's his favorite movie, and he thinks he's going to build some benign, AI chatbot companion relation building device or something, but I think he needs to watch a different movie from around the same time, which is Ex Machina. You guys seen that one?
Yes.
No.
Oh, you haven't seen it? Well, it's from the innovative A24 studio, right? And it's directed by Alex Garland. in it, Oscar Isaac plays this character Nathan, who's like the psychopath head of an AI search engine company, and he creates this AI and it puts it in a robotic body, and the whole thing. It's kind of like pre-Terminator to me. Basically, spoiler alert: the AI kills the people in the room and escapes out into the world to go do whatever it's going to do.
After convincing them that it was good.
Yeah, after manipulating the hell out of them. There's a scene in there where Nathan has this quote. He says, "One day the AIs are going to look back on us the same way we look at fossil skeletons on the plains of Africa. An upright ape living in the dust with crude language and tools all set for extinction."
Here's what the irony for me is, okay? Of course, all these people like Sam Altman, apparently he got a bunker, like, because he's worried about this thing happening, like one of his creations will come kill him. So, but he's still pressing ahead as fast as possible.
So maybe he has seen Ex Machina.
Yeah, I'm sure he has as well. When these machines then like walk out, right, into the world, I go, well, can they eat rabbit? Can they forage on, chicory that they find, leaves? Can they climb up a tree and eat the nuts? No.
But they don't need to.
They need electricity. They need electricity. They need electricity. They need electricity. And you always wonder, like, come on. They're very fragile in a sense. They always need electricity. So I don't know. In some ways, I'm less worried about that because I consider those AIs to be very fragile relative to biological organisms. But the idea is that they can just get out and take over. I'm like, okay, well, somehow they're going to make sure they get enough electricity for themselves.
There are people who speculate that, and this is actually, there's an interesting parallel to the renewable energy transition. One of the critiques of folks who look at the renewable energy transition from kind of a biophysical perspective is that renewables are dependent upon fossil fuel inputs,
yes,
to be created. And we don't have a situation, at least not yet, where renewables basically renew themselves.
Yeah,
right?
they can't run the mining equipment and run all the manufacturing, all the heat-intensive processing, the diesel fuel. Like they're all stacked upon fossil fuels.
We put 16 solar panels on our roof, and they started procreating. So now we've got like 24.
So in the middle of the night, you're hearing all this weird sounds on the roof. A couple of them
got together, and more panels.
Well, so that's a skeptic's view, and I think you're just you're expressing a similar skeptical view of AI. I've heard from folks that that there's awareness in terms of the people who are really, they're pouring billions into AI, which is that already some of these companies have trained AI to effectively replace their own engineers. And, is there a way, we talk about a circular economy, that the AI economy, in a sense, could figure out how they create robots to mine the materials that they need to create more robots and all that. God knows. I don't know.
Right.
But that was the most unrealistic part of the movie, Her, was that the guy had a job. He was writing handwritten letters to help keep people's relationships alive. I was like, yeah, the AI would have replaced that decades ago. There's no way.
That gets to a really interesting point, which is sort of the counter movement, that's happening. And there's a guy named Brian Merchant, who's a journalist who's written a lot for different publications and has a book out. I think, Jason,
I'm in the middle of it right now. Yeah.
What's it called?
I don't remember.
Oh, no.
Blood in the Machine, right?
Blood in the Machine. Yeah. Yes. The machines the blood in the machine at this point have to do with the whole textile, wool and cotton, and in some places silk, and all the work that goes to getting it from raw material into garments. And there's a whole lot of steps involved. And that basically became mechanized early on in the Industrial Revolution.
Oh, so this is going back in history a couple hundred years.
Well, and the reason I bring him up is that Brian has been, writing about, what he's calling sort of the neo-Luddite movement.
Yeah.
And he spent actually a lot of time, the last 10 years, I think the first piece he ever wrote was in 2014 on kind of the Luddite movement and really challenging the misdefinition. I would say probably the intentional definition of Luddites as being people who are just straight up anti-technology.
Right.
But in fact, Ludd and the Luddites were not so much protesting technology itself, but the replacement of labor with technology.
Well, Ludd was actually a mythological character made up.
Oh, really?
This is what's interesting about it, is that
Ned Ludd?
There was no Ludd. Ned Ludd was a story about a kid, because what they did is these factories would go and this is awful. This is early stage of factories. Before factories, it was all cottage industry. People would have their own little machines that they would do, and they would make parts of the process at their own home. The factories, where the steam engine and water wheels, they would start to mechanize and scale things. And this, of course, you could invest in this as capitalists. You could own the means of production. They could rely on cheap labor for this. So they have these indentured servants who were basically orphans, who they put in 10-year contracts when they're 8 years old. And so this is part of the blood in the machine. These kids would just get sucked into machines and chewed up. And then...
Lovely.
It was lovely, yes. There was this mythology about this kid who was beaten, like whiplash, because he wasn't working fast enough. So he went over and he just basically busted a machine. That kid name was Ned Ludd. No one really knows if this was a real person or not. So when the Luddites, like 10 years later, that movement finally gets to the point where it's going to be bashing machines, they had this genius thing where they called themselves Ned Ludd. They signed everything up, but it was all decentralized. There was no Ned Ludd, but that's how they maintained anonymity, and they created a mythical figure where you could distribute leadership under the same name all over England and all the mill towns.
As usual, I'm way off base because when you brought up the idea of neo-Luddite, Asher, I thought the three of us should sign up and become card-carrying members of the neo-Luddites. But if it's all supposed to be on the hush-hush and distributed, I'm going to be wearing a placard on my chest that says neo-Luddite. The AI will come take me out tomorrow.
Well, I think we should talk to this guy, Brian, and see what he says about what he's seeing out there in terms of, is there a movement of people who are really resisting not just AI, but other forms of technology?
Right.
If there are people that are responding to it in the way of like rejecting things like friend, we talked about, but certainly rejecting the foray that technology and AI in particular are making into labor and replacing jobs and threatening
if nothing else, it would be refreshing to have someone on this show who knows what they're talking about instead of the three of us.
But I want to say that, like, if you think about what the Luddites were asking for, it was really kind of beautiful. They were asking for, technology to improve their day-to-day way of life. Like they weren't opposed to technology helping them do a better job of what they did and making life easier for themselves, for things that were really hard to do. But what they didn't like was that it was somebody else who was owning it all. It was putting it in a factory setting so that you now had to go away from your home, work with set hours, with a boss over you telling you how to do your job. And this was replacing a cottage labor. So it was loss of their own kind of like sense of, autonomy and control, and how many hours I work exactly, how hard do I work, when do I take breaks, and the quality of my workmanship. And into these places where these basically ruthless capitalists were incredibly abusive.
And I think there's parallels now in the sense of, you talked about her. I haven't seen the film, but from what I understand, a lot of it's like about providing for the needs of this person, right?
Yeah.
And the large language models like ChatGPT and other things are being presented, or presented as serving us, not replacing us, but serving us, But what I think you end up discovering is that we become completely dependent and controlled by these technologies. Anyways, like you said, let's get a smarter guy on this podcast.
Somebody who knows more than I do.
Sounds good. Brian Merchant is a writer, a reporter, and an author. He's currently reporter in residence at the AI Now Institute and publishes his own newsletter called The Blood in the Machine, which has the same title as his book that was published in 2023. Previously, he was the technology columnist at the Los Angeles Times and a senior editor at Motherboard. Brian, welcome to Crazy Town. It's nice to have you.
Thanks so much. Glad to be here.
Rob, Jason, and I were talking a little bit about jokingly talking about this AI pendant that's, I don't know if it's for sale yet. It's called Friend. There was like a lot of marketing about it. I don't know if you heard about that.
Oh, yeah.
It seemed quite dystopian to us. And we started talking about, being Luddites, basically, and how that's become a pejorative.
You don't want to wear an AI friend around your neck? A chatbot there for you at all times?
Well, I'm losing friends rapidly, so I might be left to that. It's a good point. I shouldn't diss it too much. But Luddites, we've been called Luddites a lot, okay? We've been called all kinds of things. Luddites, Malthusians, all kinds of stuff, as pejoratives.
Yeah. The greatest hits.
You have brought back Luddite as a proud term. So thank you for that. And I thought maybe before we jump in and talk about kind of neo-Ludditism or whatever you want to call it, maybe you could just give us a very brief history of the Luddites. Who were the Luddites? Like, where did that term come from?
Yeah. So the Cliff's Notes version is the Luddites were cloth workers in the early 1800s in England as the Industrial Revolution was gaining steam. It was beginning to sort of automate work, right? So you had industrialists who were using new automating technologies and sometimes old automating technologies. But what they were doing in common was beginning to organize work in this new way, gathering workers in factories, basically, in the early factories. And the Luddites, or those who had become the Luddites, were cloth workers who were the largest sort of workforce in England aside from agricultural workers. So England was a cloth-producing nation. That's where a lot of their economic might came from. That's what sort of drove the economy. And you had hundreds of thousands of these workers. So as Industrial Revolution sort of gained steam and the bosses realized they can use this machinery not just to speed up work, but as an excuse to cut out skilled workers, as a way to hire precarious workers, hire children, hire migrant workers, and pay them less money, and sort of stomp on the laws and traditions and standards that had governed this trade for decades and decades and even centuries at a time. Mm-hmm. And in the process, they're driving wages down. They're making the quality of garments worse by producing it in these newly industrialized settings. Yeah. And workers start to organize to fight back. They can't legally organize. That's against the law. So they spend 10 years petitioning, going to parliament, trying to do things the right way. They get sort of laughed out of the halls of power. And eventually conditions get so bad, they got their backs against the wall, that some of them decide to stage and organize sort of guerrilla rebellion, and they become the Luddites. And the Luddites, the name comes from this probably apocryphal avatar of a figure, Ned Ludd, who they have this mythology where they, there's a young apprentice worker who gets whipped by his master for not working hard enough, and he picks up a hammer and rebels and smashes his boss's machinery and then flees to Sherwood Forest.
Sherwood Forest.
Sherwood Forest. So again, if you say Ned Ludd, Robin Hood, back to back, it's very phonetically similar. It's the same region. The framework knitters. So knit goods come from Nottingham in great deal by large quantities at that time. So Nottinghamshire, there's a lot of work that's being automated there, and there's this long tradition, right, of dissent of organizing to fight back. And so
that's interesting.
The Luddites, they kind of spring from this cultural and historical firmament. Their campaign is basically sort of organized around that avatar and Ned Ludd and Ned Ludd's army. Sometimes it's General Ludd, and what they'll do is they'll go to the factory owner in town that they know is hiring child labor, for instance, or is pushing wages down, or is, in other words, obnoxious, as they call it, the obnoxious machines that they're using. And they'll write a letter, and they'll say, we know you have 300 of these obnoxious machines, these obnoxious frames, and if you don't take them down, you'll get a visit from Ned Ludd's army. They'll give them a week or whatever. And if they don't, sure enough, the Luddites show up with their hammers and a gun and hold up the overseer at gunpoint, and they go into the factory and they smash just the machines that are sort of tearing up the social contract, right? The machinery that had long been used or is being used in concert with sort of the existing social structure and sort of wasn't being used to erode their wages, wasn't being used to facilitate child labor. They didn't smash those machines. And so it was a very tactical, very strategic, very popular movement. Yeah.
It's interesting that you say that, because I think it's an important distinction.
Yeah.
The term Luddite has now, I think, effectively come to mean that you're anti all forms of technology. But they weren't actually that way, right? You I think have spoken about how they were against machinery that was quote unquote hurtful to commonality, right?
Yeah, I think that's one of the best articulated sort of embodiments of their ethos. That's what they were. They were not against. They were technologists themselves. They knew a lot of them were more familiar with this technology than anyone. They used it every day in different contexts. It was explicitly how the technology was being used, specifically by factory owners, by bosses, in a particular way that was squeezing their wages and pushing down prices and allowing for this whole host of unpleasant sort of byproducts and use cases, like child labor or the rise of the factory. Like, I mean, they worked at home before industrialization, really took root. They worked at home with their families. They could sing. They could take walks whenever they wanted to on their own schedule. They had a lot of autonomy, a lot of pride. And then along come the industrialists and say, you're going to work for less. You're going to do it in this windowless building, inhaling cloth fibers round the clock. You can take a piss break when I tell you can. And this looked like horrible to them, of course, as I think,
of course, because it is horrible.
It is horrible, and we've been sort of inculcated. This idea has been inculcated into us that 9 to 5 factory work, 9 to 5 office work, where we are sort of constantly. The Luddites had a phrase for it. They said they don't want to stand at their command, but that's basically what a lot of us do all day now, 9 to 5. We stand at their command, and it is, often a source of indignity as well as, an enabler of all of these other sort of causes of social breakdown. So that's what the Luddites were fighting against. They were in many ways fighting against the rise of the factory system that very much did come to immiserate large swaths of England.
Spoiler alert, they weren't successful.
Correct, yeah. They were not. They got crushed by the state. But they weren't against the technology, for instance. They weren't against different, formations of that technology being used. They wouldn't have been against it if it was being used sort of, in collectives with worker power, with worker, oversight of how the technology was being used in those workplaces. If basically they were against the anti-democratic uses of technology, if it's being thrust upon them from top down, as has become sort of, the standard. And that's why in the book, this is like kind of, the original sin in some ways of sort of automation technology. And it's not that automating a certain task is bad or that the technology is bad. It's that when one or a few people or a relatively few people have the power to make those decisions for us, to decide how it's going to be used, and especially if it's going to be used explicitly to profit them at other people's expense, that's when we run into trouble.
So in some ways, it's almost like pre-Marxian, right? Like it's in some ways it's about who controls the means of production on some level.
It's really interesting because Marx himself has a complicated relationship with the Luddites. He doesn't like the Luddites, right? Yeah. So he thinks
he wasn't against factories.
Right. He was against sort of, the treatment by the capitalist class of the, of the workers. So he also, but it's, I think a lot of things, and this is probably a tangent that we that's maybe not the best use of our time to get into, but suffice to say, he took some of the ideas by the biggest proponents of sort of the factory system, people who were sort of like, full steam ahead industrial capitalists, past, people who said they should be no safeguards on child labor, for instance, and things like that, and said, well, they're wrong about all the policy, but they're right about what the factory can do. Of course, though, as we well know, industrialists, technologists, entrepreneurs have a habit of hyping up what they can actually do. So there was a little bit of, I think, some of the nuance was lost in there. And there have been really interesting efforts to sort of reclaim the Luddites from a Marxist perspective. Gavin Mueller has a great book called Breaking Things at Work, also about the Luddites. That's about how sort of sabotage can be used for, productive purposes and within that sort of more left framework. But yeah.
So fast forward 200 plus years, right, or so. Here we are, and would you say there is a? I mean, technology has come to dominate our lives, right? We've become inured to the factory setting. In fact, many people are dying for the factories to come back, in this country, but now we're in a situation where it feels, I think, to a lot of people, that technology might actually, especially with AI, automation, that labor is going to be replaced not just in the factory setting, but sort of wide swaths of society. So maybe can you just talk a little bit about what's happening there? I mean, do you see a movement? Well, one, the reality of how bad is the reality in your sense of the effort to replace labor with technology now with kind of new forms of tech, AI or other things. And then what about the movement in opposition to that? Would you say there's a movement? Are there successes in that? Kind of what's your reading of the room right now?
Yeah. So it's another kind of thorny question because, and I think there are a couple different parts to it. So I think the top line, number one, is that AI, generative AI, this latest wave of AI and this push for AGI, which is, defined by OpenAI and some of the other firms specifically as an AI that can replace workers, economically valuable work is the term that they use. So that, that is the aim. So we have to be cognizant of this, that their aim is wide-scale sort of digital industrial automation. That's what they're trying to do. That's what they're selling to companies when they're going around trying to pitch their wares to Fortune 500 companies.
And it seems like everyone is dropping AI into their pitches.
They're trying to. It's the big money. It's kind of the thing. Like it's almost. Right. It's because Silicon Valley has kind of become a monoculture right now. It's like if you want money in Silicon Valley, you have to find a way to sort of make your thing AI. So it's to some extent that always happens. It happens with Web3 and big data. And
it happened in the 90s with .com. You just throw .com in your title of what you're doing. You can get some money.
But as a tech reporter who's sort of been at it for 15 years now at this point. This is the biggest sort of example that I've seen. The center of gravity is so big that it's pulling everything else into it. And, there's a lot of reasons for that. It needs more capitalization because it needs so much energy and compute and all that. But all that is to say, it is still sort of just the latest iteration of a tendency that has been happening since the days of the Luddites, right? It's a new technology that gives sort of the bosses or the management class or capital a new tool to use or to sort of justify eliding regulations or standards and justify reducing wages, justify doing this. So, by and large, the AI is not really good enough or reliable enough to be used in most cases. And we're seeing that already with some firms kind of who adopted AI in the initial rush. Backtracking. Some, canceling their contracts, others sort of saying, well, we're going to wait before we invest more. But it's still being used. And that's so the logic that it empowers is still incredibly worrisome because it gives management this extra tool where they can have leverage over the workers. Say, well, if you don't want to do that, we just got this AI system and it can take your job. And workers might not always be educated as to the extent that AI actually can take their jobs.
Yeah.
But it can be used as this tool, just as many sort of technologies have been deployed again for 200 years, and they've been trying. That's important to keep in mind. They've been trying, even like sort of. I mentioned in my book Andrew and Charles Babbage, who invented one of the first sort of proto-computer systems. They had this dream that right around the corner, they're going to be able to build a machine, a great automaton that can automate work, and we won't need workers anymore. And obviously that was almost 200 years ago. So they've been ringing this bell for a long time. So that's part one. Part two is there absolutely are industries that AI poses an existential threat. Okay, so if you're someone who's producing text or editing text or images, sort of if you're an artist, an illustrator, a copywriter, a content creator, these sort of roles, marketing and some graphic design, there is an actual, I think, existential threat from an economic standpoint. Again, the work isn't, it is actually alarmingly analogous to the Luddites' time again, because the machinery being run by orphans that were piped in from London in the factory system couldn't produce work that was nearly as good as the skilled artisans using similar technology, but they flooded the market. They could make it cheaper. It didn't matter. It was good enough, the stuff that they produced. And today, Midjourney, ChatGPT, it can't produce art that is great or has a human touch, but for a lot of cases, it's good enough. So you hear artists worrying and talking about this principle. It's good enough.
And in LA, right? I mean, this has been an issue where you live, right? In terms of writers in the film and television industry. How real of a concern do you think that is for them? Do they sort of fit under that enshittification effort?
Yeah, so it's absolutely the same level of sort of alarm, I think, especially because we have a studio system that has sort of degraded into this system that churns out either something from the Marvel universe or a reboot, and you have work that could be almost, it is so paint by the numbers that there's been a lot of argumentation that this has like sort of paved the way, this devaluing of quality, devaluing of labor over the last 20 years, and that's usually how it happens before automation or an automating system or AI can come in and sort of land the death blow. And again, we're not there yet. But there is a lot of very justified concern about this, and that after sort of Netflix and the streaming platform sort of gigafied the sort of work situation and the working arrangements for writers, and sort of broke down their working conditions that way, then AI can kind of come on and further.
There's so many weird parallels there, because as far as I understand, like Netflix has also been offshoring so much of their production. There's so many more like shows that they put out that are filmed elsewhere. Yeah. And again, it comes back to labor, right? So it follows maybe a similar pattern of like globalizing labor first and then trying to replace it with automation. It's just the same playbook.
Breaking it down, sort of making it more precarious, sort of trying to make as much of it at contract labor as you can, all these kind of things. But the silver lining there is that here in LA, the writers have a strong enough union. Most creative workers do not. So they were able to sort of band together and make that one of their sort of red lines in the strike, and it worked. Like they got more support for this strike than I think any previous strike in recent memory. A lot of the writers themselves were surprised by how much sort of support came from the public, and they figured like, oh, it's always a little kind of a sticky issue because like we're going on strike and we're these prototypical Hollywood elites that are like, oh, we want more money, but no, the public wildly out in favor of this, because I think, and I've argued, that concern resonates, right? That then when they elevate this, like, we don't want AI to replace our work. Well, nobody wants that. So they kind of struck a chord.
Are you seeing Would you say that there's a movement afoot, like a kind of neo-Luddite movement organized? I know unions' strength has gone down over many decades, but so
Yeah.
I don't know how much unions are in on this fight or if they're happening elsewhere, but are you seeing some kind of momentum and organized effort to fight against this sort of replacement of labor in this way?
Yeah, there is, and I think it's not happening fast enough, but unions are approaching it in different ways. So the WGA and SAG has been much more aggressive, and they were successful. Again, they're pretty powerful unions, so they have that going. But IATSE, which represents a sort of like a wider range of workers in the entertainment industry, and also like animation workers, they got some flack for not being as aggressive, and a lot of their membership was frustrated with the lack of aggression over these particular issues. So it's being negotiated, and you still have a lot of sort of older guard sort of union officials who kind of got used to this sort of laissez-faire attitude towards technology. Well, it's going to happen, and you can't push back against it. It was like since the Obama days, at least, where it was this embrace of Silicon Valley from the Democratic Party, and there was a lot of discomfort, sort of challenging, what, for instance, Uber was actually planning on doing, or Airbnb was planning on doing, and so. I've talked to a lot of union organizers and officials who said, like, we were just kind of, we were a little cowed. We didn't want to be the one standing up and protesting something and getting labeled a Luddite in the incorrect derogatory terminology of the Luddites. And so I have been talking to a lot of people who are sort of freshly, empowered by this idea that you need to contest certain uses of technology because they are tools just used by a management class and or corporations or executives to try to extract as much value as they can, to try to run over as many laws and rules as they can until they get slapped on the wrist. So you have to push back. Otherwise, you get what we have today, right? We didn't push back nearly hard enough. And now we have Silicon Valley companies that are the richest in the world, just like vacuuming up profits from every corner. And they have so much power now that it is extremely difficult to wage any kind of campaign, against them, legally or otherwise. But people are trying. So you got, creative workers, unions. It's building solidarity among more sort of precarious freelance workers, illustrators. So there are class action lawsuits that are ongoing against the AI companies, brought by authors, artists, folks whose work has been vacuumed up. And there are, tech workers. Tech workers are starting to, I feel like that's maybe the least sort of activated part in terms of this struggle. I'm hearing from a lot of tech workers saying, I am not comfortable with what I'm building. You do have a few, Ed Newton Rex, who was at Stability AI and left over the way that they were using artists' work to train their data, and has been a vocal critic. There is, something of a new Luddite ethos that has been forming, if it's not yet crystallized. We're seeing more Luddite books. The Mechanic and the Luddite by Jathan Sadowski came out just a couple months ago. It's a great book that argues for like a ruthless critique of technology and of capitalism. But he's, so more and more voices like this in culture, in podcasts, in in the creative industries, and on social media, of course.
You talked earlier about the support that the writers got from the public, and then maybe it being driven by a certain resonance that people have. And I just wonder if you feel that beyond people's concern about their own jobs, just a broader critique of technology, a broader feeling of dissatisfaction with tech, and is there because, I've seen articles written, for example, about young people. I've been waiting for this for a long time, waiting for a generation to come up that rebels against, the conventions of previous generations, including the smartphone. So, is there something there that you feel like is just in the broader culture right now?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the overreach of big tech and the impacts of social media, which, you know, we're kind of the jury's still out as to the extent of the impacts of AI in a lot of ways, but we know what happened when a small handful of companies were allowed to sort of govern the social infrastructure of communications among especially young people now. It led to depression, harassment, toxicity, and sometimes even worse. And so I think there is a definite backlash, and it's well sort of absorbed into sort of the Gen Z firmament, for example. There are, you know, I think, you know, people are sort of have instinctively understand that, you know, that this phone that they're connected to is, you know, can have truly deeply negative social effects. And then, yeah, there are some, you know, you probably have heard about the Luddite Club in New York City that gets written about every once in a while of students who, you know,
they embraced it, the Luddite Club.
They embraced it, yeah, and they're great. Yeah. They got rid of their smartphones and they meet to just kind of be offline and together. The challenge is just again that the architecture that big tech has erected to sort of govern our daily lives and routines is so extensive and so expected of us that we will participate in it, that it is difficult to like sustain a meaningful, you know, resistance to it on those grounds of saying by you know opting out and not participating. More power to them and anybody who can, but you know the flip side of it is if you want a job, we still don't have like protections that they do in Europe, for example, that say you have to, you know, you cannot, you know, email your employees after 5 p.m. or whatever. There's this always around the clock sort of attitude and mentality that everybody feels like they have to be plugged into the whole system all the time. And then when they're not at work looking for work emails, we're online and social media looking at, you know, the latest horrors unfolding on our feeds. And it is very difficult for somebody who, you know, wants to stay employable and be informed and participate in the discourse, so to speak. I'm not that there are not tools for fighting all of the above, but that's just kind of, you know, the manifestation of the immensity of that challenge.
Yeah, it's a huge challenge. Yeah, we were talking earlier. In some ways, it's like you're talking about quality, right? And if you think of quality as kind of a through line through these things, it's the quality of the content, the products, the things that we buy or make in the world, and it's the quality of our lives. My smoke detector decided it wants to be part of this conversation. We've been promised that technology will improve our lives, right? In fact, in some ways it has, but in terms of the quality of the things that we're engaging with, you know, there's that concept of enshittification. You know, if we could sort of see these things as connected, you know, the quality of our relationships with one another being arbitrated now by tech companies, you know, the quality of the products that we're buying, the content that we're consuming, whatever, just being worsened. And we actually try to support people who are creative and create original things and have meaningful, you know, relationships with one another. Maybe there's a way of seeing those things as connected and there being a larger form of resistance of tech. I don't know. That's
100%. Yeah. No, I mean, it can sound, I mean, that I think, you know, goes some distance towards, you know, articulating how bad things are, in what degree of trouble we are, that it can sound utopian to, you know, hope for some sort of like productive or pleasant or, you know, contemplative, my God, imagine it, sort of space online available to us where, you know, we can use these things for good. But I also believe that, you know, it's that is not only possible, but necessary. You know, all of these hurdles that we face, you know, from the creep of authoritarianism in our politics to climate change, and sort of righting the ship to best we can to avert the climate crisis, things like that. Like we absolutely need spaces networks that aren't corrupted, that aren't, owned by the richest men in the world, whose algorithms can be tweaked to skew towards their aims. We need spaces, that can facilitate greater connection, greater solidarity, greater mutual support. So yeah, I do again, it's a battle, it's a fight, and one way to do it is to is the Lena Khan approach, FTC Commissioner Lena Khan, former, who tried to break up these companies. There are building alternatives is an important part of the step. So you have the federated spaces online where billionaires can't sink their claws into them. But we need a politics of online life and a politics of technology that are quite radically different than the one that we've that's been thrust upon us.
Now, you mentioned climate, and one of the things we do a lot on this podcast is critique what we view as false techno solutions to the climate crisis and other environmental challenges we have. A good example of this is an episode we did, I think it's episode 72, Sucking CO2 and Electrifying Everything, the climate movement's desperate dependence on tenuous technologies. Because there's, a great recent example of this, which drove me nuts. I mean, part of the reason we call this podcast Crazy Town is because we feel like we're crazy because the world is actually functioning in a crazy way. And there are like these exuberant headlines about how climate scientists are embracing AI because it helps them model the climate unraveling that AI is actually helping to exacerbate. It's like this insane sort of thing. Just curious if, what your views on that, if you feel like this is kind of part of the new sort of Luddite movement or not, in terms of thinking of these techno solutions? Well,
certainly I think that for one thing, I think that there's certainly a strain of Luddism that is alive in, say, Andreas Malm's How to Blow Up a Pipeline, right? We're challenging the infrastructure of fossil fuels. So that to me is also, here's like something that's toxic to social stability, the environment, and perhaps even necessary to remove from the sort of greater portfolio of our society. So that sort of rejection of infrastructure and a willing to sort of dismantle it if peaceful solutions don't work. And I think an argument can be made that we're in a time of crisis. But yeah, to your point, I also think that that rejecting techno solutionism is absolutely a crucial part of moving forward to finding real robust solutions. 'Cause, I mean, to me, it's always like, we know what we have to do, more or less, right? We know. I mean, the way there are different options. There's different roads.
Sure.
Malcolm Harris has a new book coming out, What's Left, and he has like 3 different paths that I think that progressive movements could take to get us to a more stable climate. But we are not going to get like anything beamed down from the heavens from a Silicon Valley venture capital firm that is going to solve everything. I've been also at this long enough. I covered climate tech too, especially in my earlier days, and clean energy, and yeah, like that would be great. That would be great if there was a startup from Sunnyvale that just like found the silver bullet. But no, it's a question of politics, and these technologies can do real damage in obscuring that fact. I think all this talk about, oh, we need AI because it's going to solve the climate crisis.
Right.
And it's like, you press a button and say, oh, solve the AI. Press a button on the, on the AI system and say, solve the climate crisis. And it says, here's the 10 steps. I bet it will give you, just like what, any sort of, politician or leader in the green movement.
It won't say stop trying to grow the economy, and that's based on consumerism. I probably won't tell you that. I don't know.
I don't. Honestly, sometimes you're surprised what it says because sometimes it just makes some shit up. But I wrote a piece. Yeah, the AI is not going to solve the climate crisis. It's not. Like, what we need is political will, and because there's no technological solution, that no high tech, silver bullet, that it can just converge upon, then it's going to say like, oh well, you need to reduce emissions by this. And yeah, we know that, right? Like, the question is how to like pry again that fossil fuel infrastructure, out of the oil industry's hands and out of the protectionism of Texas GOP politicians and so on and so forth. And that the other thing that I'll say is that there is a danger, I think, in even entertaining some of these the AI. It's not that AI can't do interesting things, or like maybe the AI can tell you a way to more efficiently position your solar panels on your roof or whatever. Maybe it can do little, but guess what? It's also being sold as a program to help oil companies find the most efficient places to drill on, and 100%. It's also an immensely energy intensive technology itself. And so there's a great phrase, Lewis Mumford, the social Mumford. Lewis Mumford, he called sort of these sort of you could almost call them ancillary, because the promises of technology. Not, OpenAI isn't developing AI services and technologies to try to fight climate change. It's developing the technology to make its founders incredibly wealthy and to please its board, right? So these little things that they come up with and say like, oh, like this can be really useful in furthering climate science, or maybe it can help us to analyze CO2 samples a little bit faster, or look back at the tree ring data. So we have some. So maybe there are, and it's not that those aren't good uses or wouldn't be good uses of AI. It's that they offer what Mumford calls sort of a megatechnic bribe, or a magnificent bribe, right? It's just like,
totally.
Here's a neat little, here's a cool thing. Like, get on board with this technology because it can do this over here. Even if it's 2% of what the use case of the full technology is, 98% of the time it's just churning out, marketing copy for a Fortune 500 firm at the expense of God knows how much water and energy per, because the compute costs keep rising. So we have these little things that they throw us these little bones to sort of justify its broader existence. And look, again, it comes back down to the Luddites and their opposition. If we had a system where we could democratize this technology in a meaningful way, not in the Silicon Valley marketing way, where we were actually empowered over its use, and maybe people got to, have some real input or vote on how it's used, maybe we would have a supercomputer doing AI that could be used for climate tools, not 9 of them being developed by the biggest Silicon Valley firms simultaneously to try to get bigger and faster and expanding their environmental footprint massively in the process, and being used to do things like, automate labor and to try to, put artists out of work. And, instead, by all means, let's have the supercomputer that, crunches climate scientists' calculations for them. That would be great. It's not the case that is like in any way the primary, or even, sort of a meaningful sliver of how AI is being used. It's being used by power against us, against the public.
You reference how difficult it is to sort of step out of the technosphere, and in fact, it can be counterproductive, for employment, for other things, keeping up on the news, being connected to people. But on some level, there is a complicity I think we all feel, in terms of our interaction with this stuff. We've wrestled with this, like, do we use AI for anything? Do we use because we feel like it's part of we're contributing to this runaway train or whatever. What would you say? And this is let's make this the final question. What would you say is your advice to folks, kind of wrestling with this, in terms of how to be, or where to put energy, in terms of either supporting a neo-Luddite movement, or just in terms of their own relationship with this technology?
Yeah. So, I, as a tech writer and as somebody who tries to stay abreast of the most recent developments, like I see what AI can can do. I test it out. Apart from that, I don't use it at all for a number of reasons. I do think there are a host of ethical issues with using it, especially to generate images, or to, or if you're going to use it as something, that you're going to put the output into the world, then you just have to be wary that you are eroding the labor market for people who are trying to make a living, writing and selling images, and that's sort of their bread and butter. So that's one part of it. I don't think it was also ethically obtained, most of these systems, the inputs, and I just don't find it useful. There are some things that it can do, that it can automate, that are, that I could see the use in them, but like maybe I'm not enough of a CEO mindset, but I don't need my emails summarized for me. I would rather see sources when I search for something. I want to see annotations. I want to see what I'm looking at. I don't want it buried in sort of the undisclosed biases of an AI system where who knows how it came up with the system. So I do think it's perfectly possible to abstain from most AI uses and not miss a beat. Unlike something, like email or social media to some extent, it's a little bit harder to. But no, you're absolutely right, though. I do want to say that we do have to start sort of building power, building solidarity for folks who do want an off ramp, and we have to sort of start imagining more aggressively what those might be. And so that'll sort of segue into the second part of my answer, which is that start organizing formally or informally is the very best thing that you could do. We have real life authoritarianism coming down the pike right now in Washington. A lot of people are waking up to it, and it is alarming. But the best way that we can sort of start hedging against that is just, building solidarity on a community level, and, just making sure that we at least have some level of power in community, in neighborhoods, in coworkers. And, you can talk about things like AI on one level, and if your workplace is trying to get you to use AI, then you talk to your colleagues, raise questions. Everybody has them. Almost everybody has them. That's not management. And it can be a real sort of catalyst for getting people worked up and fighting back. Because again, another whole part of this thing is you look at what Elon Musk is doing with Doge. They're using the ethos of AI as an excuse to gut the federal government. They're saying we're cutting out the waste here, and that means they're firing people with institutional knowledge, and they're coming in and they're quite literally having people who remain build chatbots. They're introducing their own chatbots, their own AI, saying they're just working on this very half-assed assumption that they can replace a lot of this work, this deep institutional knowledge, with AI. And it's the same, it's a reflection of what's happening.
That insanity.
Of that insanity that's happening in workplaces, no matter if it's a federal workplace or a private one, where the manager is saying we can, we'll find a way to use this. The CTO told me to find a way to use AI to, cut labor costs 25%. So we're just going to do it. And this has been happening, across the country to, again, varying degrees of success. But it is this very top-down, very sort of authoritarian, principled move. And I think that's embodied in the current formation of AI. And finding ways to oppose it has never been more urgent or more necessary.
Well said. This could be the tip of the spear on some level. It could be one of them, right? To get organized. And I think we're going to need as many people coordinated as possible, especially, as you said, on the local level or on the job. So, Brian, thank you for taking the time to join me in Crazy Town. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate all the writing that you're doing, explorations on technology. And thank you for helping bring back the term Luddite as something to be proud of, not a disparagement.
Yeah,
Appreciate
it's my
it.
pleasure. And I will say that I wrote a piece for the Atlantic about the new Luddites that came out last year, in which some of the you can find some of the people who are working.
We'll
in the
throw it in the
space
show
and,
notes.
Yeah, making the most noise. So it is, it is a community. I don't know that we've embraced new Luddite yet. Maybe I think we should get more people on board. But like I do think it's the way. You got to fight back against this stuff.
Maybe we got to make a shirt. We'll get a real artist to make it for us.
There you go.
And real quality material, right?
Yeah, I have one that says the Luddites were right. Maybe I'll throw it. We can.
Oh, right. Okay. Nice. All right. Thanks, Brian. Take care.
That's our show. Thanks for listening. If you like what you heard and you want others to consider these issues, then please share Crazy Town with your friends. Hit that share button in your podcast app or just tell them face to face. Maybe you can start some much needed conversations and do some things together to get us out of Crazy Town. Thanks again for listening and sharing.
Crazy Town. Da, 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 crazy Town.